facilitator, and speaker. She has over 30 years of executive experience, having worked in senior leadership position in multinational organization in Canada, UAE, and Egypt. And she graduated from Canada with BSc in computer science, specialized in forensic engineering. And Rania has accumulated a record of more than 5,000 hours individual and group coaching, and have some credential, for example, master certificate coach and certified positive psychology practitioner. So this is some about Rania, and she can add maybe something more. And today we are going to speak about 6 practices of masterful coaching. So Rania, the word is yours, and let's begin.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for this introduction. It's nice to see some familiar faces within the Zoom virtual environment. It's also nice to see some new names. It's a pleasure to be with you. And as Jan mentioned, my life and my experience and my work has taken me over several places, from being a corporate veteran to being a facilitator, finally to being a coach. And what I love to say is I now kind of associate with my being as a coach who does other things. I'm very proud to be a coach. I love how coaching has made me a more humble and curious human being more than anything else. And what I want to work to go through with you today are 6 practices that make us masterful coaches. And before we go to the practices that make us masterful coaches, I wanted to start off by looking at how most of us go through the journey of becoming coaches in the first place. First of all, when we first think of becoming a coach, it basically takes us in one of 2 areas: acquiring the competencies and the skills of coaching. So deep listening, powerful questioning, presence, connection, building an encounter of trust, having a coaching mindset, all the competencies that the ICF identifies. And we add on as well some competencies that we need to bring in order to create an encounter that is powerful, to challenge the client and bring out the best in them. And then we also look at becoming accredited coaches. Every one of us goes through that journey, and we do the hours. We want to become ACCs, and when we're ACCs, we want to become PCCs. And then if we continue in coaching, we want to move even further. So that's kind of the start of our journey. And as most of us start off in coaching, at the beginning, it's like, I want to help everybody. I want to bring coaching to the world. I want to make sure that I change people's lives. I want to create an encounter where everyone is transformed. And in a way, we become jack of all trades because we want to help anybody and everybody who comes our way. Until slowly but surely, we start to figure out who it is exactly that we are best fit for to help. We look at what are the niches we want to work in. We look at what type of coaching encounters help us become the best coaches we are, and which type of challenges we even feel passionate about. And along that journey, we discover ourselves, we discover our strengths, we discover where we're not very good at. And sometimes we discover the coaching encounters that actually trigger us. And I'm sure those of us who have been in coaching for long enough have been in situations where I've been in a coaching setup where I'm supposed as a coach to help the client bring out the best in them, but I'm actually so triggered either by the challenge or by the client's energy, or by the fact that this is not the type of challenge I even want to be working on, or the fact that I'm projecting so much from myself that it's just not working. And we work through all this until we reach a point of, in a way, I've become the best version I can be. So how do I then become even more powerful as a coach? And that's when we start looking at the next level of, and I call it mastery, not because it takes us to an MCC level, but mastery because it takes us to a deeper level of encounter with our clients. And that's the level when I've been there, I've done that, and now I want to go from good to great to being a masterful coach somehow. And that's when we start looking much more about how can I transform my being as a coach, and how can I look at practices that make me an even more powerful version of myself. And the last thing I'm going to say before I go into the 6 practices themselves is every one of these practices, before they make us more masterful coaches, more powerful coaches, more connected coaches, every one of these makes us in the end a better human being in a way. So every one of these, as we're going through them, you'll relate them to not just your encounters as a coach, but your encounter with, sometimes with yourself, with your family members, if you work in an environment with your team, with your peers, with your siblings, with your friends. So they're kind of practices that when you bring to life, transform your being as a person and eventually also transform your being as a coach. So let's go through them one by one and see how to actually apply them in our encounters. The first one I'm going to be talking about is the level of presence that we want to reach. And in a coaching session, just as in life, we usually operate from 4 levels of presence. The first level of presence is what I call the vacationer level of presence. It's when I'm sitting in a coaching session, it's going very smoothly. It sounds like I know what's going on. There's nothing that's making it difficult for me, so I'm relaxed. And I call it the vacationer presence because it's very similar to when you're on vacation, you're relaxed, you're laid back, you're not making too much effort, you're not putting in a lot of work into what you're doing, it's just flowing smoothly and simply, which is nice, except you're probably sometimes missing a lot of the essences of what's going on because you're a little bit relaxed. It looks to you from the outside like the session is flowing very smoothly, that you're just taking it easy. And sometimes you go into a coaching session where you're so tired or so stressed yourself that the coaching session for you takes the energy of, I'm just going to relax here. The next level of presence that we sometimes go into, and a lot of you relate to this, is the know-it-all presence. And that's the presence where the challenge starts sounding like something you already know, something you relate to, something you've coached many times before. And so the know-it-all presence then tells you, I know what's going on. I know the next question to ask. I know how to help this client. And sometimes it's very unconscious. So you believe you're fully present, fully connected, but actually you're starting to relate very much to what the client is saying. And in your own head, you're picking up from your experiences or experiences of other clients that you're relating to what's going on. And you're picking, again, maybe on an unconscious level, but you're looking for patterns that you're building together in a way to help the client. And that's when you go to a know-it-all kind of presence. The third level of presence is the visitor presence. And to explain the visitor presence, let's say you're going to visit a country you've never been there before, and you're going for a very limited time. Whenever we go visit a country where we have never been before and we have a limited time, we want to make sure that we see the highlights. We don't miss any of the important things. And when we come back, if anyone asks us, have you been to this country? The answer will be yes. Have you seen this and this and this? Yes. Have you been to the important restaurants? Yes. Have you seen all the important shows to be seen? Yes. But do you know anything about the culture of the people? Not sure. Have you engaged with the locals and seen how they talk? Do you know anything about their behaviors, their mindsets, the way they think, the way they operate? You haven't had a chance because you've operated there in your vacation with a mindset of, I'm just visiting, so I'm going to stay on the surface. I'm not going to dig deeper. Let's just move forward until the vacation ends. In a way, sometimes our level of presence looks like that. It's like, I don't want to get too deep into something because I'm afraid to trigger the client, or I'm afraid that I'm going to dig into something which will hurt the client, or the client seems like they're trying to avoid a certain topic, so let me avoid it too. Or I'm not very comfortable here, so let's stay on the surface. Or I've been taught that a coach needs to help the client make progress, so we need to be making progress. So we need to stay at a level where I feel that every question is bringing the client one step further and forward into where they're going. That's a level of presence. All three, by the way, are sometimes needed, all unconscious and unintentional, and we all go to those three levels of presence. There's a fourth level of presence, which brings us to mastery, and that's the level of presence of an explorer. And if I go to a place that I've never been before, that I don't know anything about, that is interesting for me to explore, then everything is green, everything is new. And in a way, even if I've been there before, I know that this time I might pick up something different. I might see something with a different perspective. I might be exposed to a different experience. I might meet someone I've never met before. So even if I've been to the same place several times, and it's the kind of childlike curiosity and sense of wonder that makes us have these excitement about simple things in life. That type of presence is the presence of a masterful coach, a coach who knows that no matter how many experiences they have, how many times they've been through the same encounter, even sometimes with the same person, but they know that every encounter, even with the same client, brings a different version of the client. So as we're talking through the 6 practices, they're the practices of an explorer presence, not a presence of a visitor or a vacationer or a know-it-all. All 3 are important, but they don't bring masterful presence to coaching. From an explorer perspective, the first practice that's very important is setting intentions. And we all say, let's set intentions. What's your intention for today? We even sometimes ask ourselves, what's our intention from this session? We ask the client, what's your intention from coming to this session today? But what I'm talking about when it comes to mastery level is setting an intention that has to do with who am I going to be today as a coach, not what am I going to do. So it's an intention that reminds me that it's not about me. It's an intention that reminds me that whatever happens in the coaching session, nobody transforms anybody else. As coaches, our biggest power is in helping clients help themselves. Our biggest power is in being ourselves fully in service of whatever wants to happen in the session. If whatever wants to happen in the session is transformation, let it be. If whatever wants to happen in the session is awareness, if whatever wants to happen in the session is just a shift in the client's perspective and looking at things, challenging a belief that the client has always had about someone else, whatever it is, it actually has very little to do with me. So the first masterful practice is to make sure that before every session, we approach the session with a curious mindset of, who am I going to be today? How am I going to be my best version? And how is it about the client and not about me? So it's about my being and not my doing. And the biggest danger here, as simplistic as it sounds, that when it becomes a practice that we do unconsciously, it almost becomes where we tell ourselves, yeah, of course I know my intention. But if I dig a little bit deeper, it's an eye-opener to realize sometimes we want to get through the session quickly. Sometimes we want to make progress with the client. Sometimes we want to make sure that the client feels at the end of the session that they're relieved. And all of this, in a way, helps us help the client, but not at the deepest possible level. So the first practice is to set a being intention that has nothing to do with believing that I can do anything for the client except show up as the best version of myself. And I agreed with Jan that if you have any questions, we keep them till the end. And also, and I really would like whoever of you wants to challenge any of these mindsets and say, you know what, I've tried that, hasn't worked, or I've tried that and it's very difficult for me. So please keep your challenges, keep your questions, keep your comments, and we will take them at the end. I'll make space for them at the end. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, so I just wanted to say that now before I move on. And I'm going to move on to the second masterful practice, which is the practice of agility. And agility has become, I think since COVID, agility has become one of those key buzzwords that we always seem to be speaking about. And there's emotional agility, there's learning agility, there's leadership agility, there's agility in organizations and having an agile culture in the organization. The word is become a very powerful word. How it applies to coaching is, and I'm going to bring up the next slide. I don't know how many of you have watched Sense of a Woman, but Scent of a Woman is a movie where Al Pacino acts as an old blind man who kind of adopts or mentors a younger man. And throughout the movie, Al Pacino helps the man change his perspective about life. And there's a scene in the movie where the person he looks like he's dancing with is actually the man's friend. She's his partner. And he tells her, I would like to dance with you, Donna. And Donna says, I mean, the first thing she thinks of probably is, oh my God, he's blind. Is he really going to be able to dance? So she looks at him and she says, well, maybe later. And he says, are you afraid, Donna? Let's dance. And you know what, Donna? And it's a tango that he invites her to. And he says, you know what? The tango is like life. There are no mistakes. If something doesn't work, just keep moving forward. And to me, that moment in the movie is the essence of agility. It's being with everything that is uncomfortable, acknowledging when you're stuck in a coaching session and finding a way to maneuver beyond it. And it's bringing to the coaching session the power of polarities. So the power of having everything and the opposite within the same session. And this is a very powerful metaphor for me because I tried for 3 years to learn salsa with my husband, and we failed miserably. And the reason we failed miserably is because we just were not able to flow in the moment with what the moment brings. If any of you have tried this kind of dancing, it's not a choreographed dance. It's not where if this happens, this is the next move. This is the next move. This is the move after that. It's a place where partners pick up from each other. So I move and then my partner picks the next move. And then my partner moves and I pick up the next move. And if at a certain point we feel stuck, we just stop for a second and keep moving. So it becomes like a fluid movement of being stuck and getting unstuck, being stuck and getting unstuck. And where do we need to be agile in coaching? It's an agility between the goal, the end in mind, and having clear steps towards the goal, and then flowing with whatever happens in the middle and in the moment. And in coaching, you always have steps you want to move, or your client will be moving in a clear sequence that seems to you like it's flowing. And then suddenly something will happen, either in the energy of the client or a word is said or something is triggered. And we feel like, okay, what do I do now? Or what question do I ask now? And part of agility in mastery is to say, it has happened, this is what needs to happen, and ask the client and co-design with the client, okay, so what's the next best question? Or where do we go from here? Or being comfortable with the fact that the flow has suddenly stopped. So the first type of agility is the agility between focusing on the goal and moving towards the goal, but flowing in the moment with whatever happens in the mess, the messy middle, as I like to call it. The other type of agility that we need to have as a coach, as a masterful coach, is the polarity between having empathy with the client and with where they are, with bringing empathy for holding the space and making the client feel acknowledged and feeling okay and feeling like whatever is happening, it is hard and this is a safe space for them to be themselves, but also bringing in the energy of compassionately challenging the client so that they don't sometimes victimize unconsciously or start believing that certain patterns are the truth, or are stuck in a certain mindset and we're so in the energy of empathizing with them that we're not challenging them enough. We're not honing in enough on the fact that, you know what, it sounds to me like you're victimizing unconsciously, or you know what, you've said this story so many times, it feels to me like you're stuck to the story. What's the truth in the story? Or you've told me this, but last time you told me something different. What's really going on? So the agility between empathy, holding the space, and challenging the client so that they uncover things that sometimes may be uncomfortable for them. And then the agility between giving the client perspective, helping them see the balcony and how things are going, but also impacting the client so that they're actually taking clear steps and moving forward. Another agility is between the clear, straight, structured process of coaching and the mess that coaching people brings to the space. And sometimes it's our own mess. So I want to follow the process, but I'm not having a good day. Or I want to be fully connected to the steps, but you know what? It just doesn't feel right. So the agility between process and mess. Another agility is between looking at the client's learning and aha moments and giving space for that and making sure that the client is moving forward towards the goal that they want to reach, which, if I want to summarize, is basically the agility between what I like to call the transactional process of coaching, which is bringing depth and making sure that every question is bringing the client closer to where they want to reach by the end of the session, but also stopping at certain moments and going deeper. So transaction, transformation, transaction, transformation. And it's the agility to go between both within the same session and being comfortable in both areas, an area where we're processing a deep emotion, and then in the same session, an area where we're putting together targets towards the next step. And a lot of times, if we don't master the agility between both, we stick to, yeah, I acknowledge that the client is going through something hard, but I'm sure the client can let it go right now because we're focused on moving forward. Or the opposite. I'm going to be so with the client processing the emotion that I don't trust that the client can process the rest themselves. And it's up to me to kind of self-manage the delicate balance between the two. If I move on from there, the third masterful practice is the practice of intuition. And I know that probably every single coaching certification program touches upon somewhere, sometime, the competency of focusing on your intuition. And the best, I guess, definition I found for intuition that really aligns with me is intuition is knowing without knowing. It's when you know how you know, but you don't really know when you don't know how you know, but you just know you know. And intuition comes from a very deep inner gut feeling. As children, we have intuitions all the time. As we grow older, we get taught to let go of our intuitions because we need to fit them within a logical framework of what makes sense to our head. Does this make sense logically? No, so let it go. An intuition that I feel or sense, people sometimes tell you, give me the rationale behind it, give me the logic behind it. Masterful coaches requires us to always practice and bring forward any intuition that we have. And the best way to connect to our intuition is to trust it, first of all, to allow it space to manifest, and whenever we have an intuition, to blurt it without being attached to it. So I feel something, it's coming to me, I'm going to say it, and a lot of times I say, you know what, I have something that I'm feeling or sensing. I don't know where it's grounded, but I'm going to say it anyway. And if you as a client don't connect to it, you can easily let it go. So it's connecting to the intuition, blurting it, but then totally letting it go, because the client knows best if that intuition makes sense. But as a coach, my role is to dig deeper into my own intuition. And the biggest challenge with bringing out our intuition into the session as coaches is two things. The first is trusting our own intuitions, trusting that they could help the client, because a lot of times the intuition is there, but we feel like if I say it, either it won't be of help or the client will think like we're crazy, or what if I say it and it doesn't land with the client, what's going to happen? And part of mastery is to believe that coaching is in essence a messy process. We start off wanting to regulate and structure the process just like everything else, but mastery requires us to bring to that structure the messiness of who we are and what our gut feelings bring to the space in a way. How do I do that? I do that by focusing. And the competency of focusing, the more I hone into these 6 things in a coaching session, the more my intuition can have space to come to life in the session. First of all, to remind myself of the interconnectedness of humans. So having a systemic lens into, okay, this is the client and this is their challenge, and I'm acknowledging that, but what else is playing? Who else is playing a role that the client is not aware of? What else do I know about this that maybe the client is not seeing? And knowing that systems are complex beings. So even when the client is talking about the relationship with themselves or the relationship with someone else, so for example, I have an issue with self-confidence, or I have an issue with I'm always my worst critic, or I have a certain fear, or I'm not able to have courageous conversations with someone, or I need to manage a conflict, or I need to work on a stakeholder map, or I need to work on my political savviness. Whatever it is that the client is actually exploring in the session, or I want to put a goal or a vision for my future, part of your intuition comes from seeing the unseen and hearing the unsaid. So I'm hearing the client saying that they're very excited about their vision, but there's fear or there's a stuckness that I sense that's just coming from my intuition. Everything the client is saying tells me they're moving forward. Everything the client is putting forward tells me they're connected to their vision. But there's just something in their voice that's not adding up, or something in the way they're saying things, or something in the pattern of their relationships that just tells me, you know what? This client sometimes has a tendency to let go of certain things, although they're important, just because they don't like conflict, or because they like to maintain the peace, or they'd rather focus on the relationship more than the task, or the task more than the relationship. The other thing that really helps us bring in an intuitive presence to coaching is always focusing on the client, not the topic. Because it's always important for us as coaches to remember the expert in the client's topic is the client, not me. No matter how long I've spent with the client has spent with their topic many more hours, sometimes many more years than I ever will be able to. So I can never become the expert in helping the client solve the topic. What I can always work on becoming a master in is helping the client help themselves. So it's like the client focuses on the topic and my zoom in is on the client and the client's relationship to the topic. That's where your intuition and the best zoom in and the best practice of mastery can come in. And the other thing is a concept that it's a famous concept developed by a Harvard professor called balcony and dance. The idea is to always dance with the client between the details of what's going on and then saying, okay, let's take a 3D perspective and see what's happening. And this is where you kind of notice changes in the tone of voice, or changes in the energy, or a sudden lowering of the volume, or a breath, excuse me, that the client suddenly took. So taking a 3D perspective and then going back to the details of what's going on in the session, and then taking a 3D perspective and then going back helps us see the little shifts, either in energy, in voice tone, in body language. Sometimes it's in the words that the client uses. And noticing words that the client stresses on versus others, or words that the client says more times than other words, and bringing that to the space, or allowing your intuition to sense what that tells it about what's really happening for the client. And this is what, I mean, we've all studied listening and the levels of listening and coaching programs. Intuition usually comes from a very deep, what we call generative listening, and it's listening to what wants to happen for the client rather than what's actually happening in the space. And of course, with all of this, the most important thing for intuition to manifest is trusting the process. And trusting the process involves trusting the client, trusting coaching, trusting yourself, and also trusting what wants to happen for the client. Because part of reaching mastery is to know that we are simply a tool in the client's life. Whatever wants to happen for them is going to happen anyway. Our ability or our power lies in helping the client deal best and focus best on how they can help themselves in that process. So that's the practice of intuition. The next practice I'm going to be talking about is the practice of active silence. And I believe of all the 6, this is probably the most difficult for most of us. An active silence is where you allow enough space for the client to reflect, for the client to dig deeper without asking them another question, just asking the question, allowing the client to dig deeper, and then giving enough space for them to reflect even more. And it's the awkward silence that comes after the client. You ask a question and then the client says, no, absolutely not. That's the time for you to say, you know what, I've just triggered something in the client's thinking. Give them the space to reflect. Or the client says, I didn't understand the question. And whenever we hear the comment, I didn't understand the question, or repeat the question, our kind of go-to strategy is, let me repeat the question, let me rephrase the question, or maybe the question didn't land. And sometimes we need to realize whether it is that the question was not clear, or it didn't land, or whether it was actually that the client has just been triggered or challenged, and I need to allow space for whatever wants to happen to manifest. And one of the things we realize as we practice coaching more and more is the biggest benefit clients get out of coaching is a place to be. I mean, you're there, but it's almost like you're a mirror, because a place for them to be with themselves, to look at their thoughts, to look at things in a space where they don't need to perform. They don't need to show up or act in a certain way. And they have the time for themselves to introspect. And most clients nowadays, whether they're executive clients or even housewives or people who are reflecting on a hobby, whatever it is, most of the time we're in the doing phase, because life is fast, because it's very demanding, because we always have more things to do than time. And so coaching is like a space that allows just time. And active silence helps us bring that. But for us to be able to bring active silence, the practice we need to bring more of is our own relationship with silence. So I'm going to be silent for 1 minute and allow you to reflect on the 3 questions that you see on the slide. And just in case you can't see them, the first one is, how comfortable am I with silent reflection? So how often do I sit with myself silently and reflect? How often do I sit and just journal about what's going on? Do I even sit with my own emotions and my own thoughts and just allow them to mindfully come out, so I examine them with curiosity? What's my own relationship with awkward silence? And the awkward word there is intentional, because when silence is uncomfortable for the client, we feel the awkwardness. And our tendency is to jump in and save sometimes ourselves from the awkwardness before it's the client. And so unless I'm comfortable with just sitting there and waiting for the client to explore, even when they're just wanting me to jump in with another question so they don't have to sit too long with something that's uncomfortable, I need to be okay with the awkwardness. And the last question is, where do I need to stretch myself in the arena of silence? So I'll give you 1 minute in silence and just see what happens there. Okay, that was 1 minute exactly. And you don't have to answer me, but I'm challenging you to kind of, between you and yourselves, ask yourselves how many of you felt uncomfortable and felt like, okay, that's enough. When is she going to continue? We've had enough waiting. That's what active silence feels like, unless we're comfortable with just being in silent reflection. And I see a lot of the ones who have their cameras on, I can see you smiling. So I'm assuming that some of you relate to what I just said. Okay. The next practice is psychological safety. And psychological safety is a word, again, that's been brought up a lot nowadays. And it's basically bringing a full safe space where the client can let down all their masks, let down all their guards, let down all their shields, afford to be messy, afford to make mistakes, afford to say things they normally wouldn't ever say in a context where they need to be appear professional or have a certain persona, a space where clients can say their real fears or what they're really ashamed of, or share things about themselves that they just feel they can never share with anyone else, or let down the burden of their worries, or tell you what it really feels like to be challenged and pushed every day by a boss who just doesn't believe in you, or tell you what it feels like to be a mom who feels taken for granted, unappreciated, sometimes unloved, or tell you, you know what, I just want them to need me. I just want to feel like my life has value and I need those around me to need me. For the client to see those things and admit them, they need a space where they know they're totally not judged, where they know that humanity is encouraged, where they know that for them to move forward, everything is welcome, everything that is part of being a human being. And I'm saying this because I'm talking about mastery level. So at mastery level, we know the boundaries between a space where clients can bring out whatever is inside them and things that shouldn't be shared, or things that, and knowing for, of course, that this whole, that a session is confidential, or that we are bound by the ICF Code of Ethics, which says if clients share certain things, we need to report them because then the client is a danger to themselves and others. So I'm not speaking about those boundaries. I'm speaking about everything else that lies within those boundaries. The client allowing themselves, in a way, metaphorically, to undress in the session and just speak from their heart about anything they feel like speaking. And the only way for me to create psychological safety is not to talk about it, is not to smile, is not to be humble, but to actually be vulnerable myself in the session. And the best definition of vulnerability I like comes from Dr. Brené Brown. She has a TED Talk, a very famous TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability. She also has a, excuse me, a Netflix talk called The Courage. She has several books. One of them is Dare to Lead and so on. But the definition of vulnerability, according to her, which really resonates with me, is it's that space where we are in the intersection of three feelings. I feel at risk, so whatever I say or do is risky. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I don't know what's going to happen next. I'm at the risk of being emotionally exposed, so I could be rejected, I could be hurt, I could be told off, I could be spoken down to, I could get someone shout to me or so on. So there is an emotional exposure to someone could hurt me. And there's uncertainty in the space. I don't know what to do exactly. I don't have the perfect plan. I don't have the perfect scenario. I'm just gonna jump in and let what happen happen. And unless I am vulnerable myself, I cannot ask anybody in my own space to be vulnerable. Because no matter how kind or simple or humble or open I am, Psychological safety requires and implies vulnerability. And how do I show vulnerability as a coach? By being myself 100%. By allowing myself to sometimes say, and we've all been there, you know what? I'm stuck. What's the next best question to ask you? Or sometimes being vulnerable to admit that you really are not the best coach for the client. I mean, I know most of you have been through sessions where you're there, you're doing your best, you're staying with the session, but inside your head, you're thinking, I really don't want to work with this client. Or I know I'm not the best person for that client. But we keep going, either because we don't want to admit failure or because it's very difficult for us to speak up and say, I wish I could help you, but I'm not the best person. Or you know what, the type of challenge that you have just doesn't bring out the best in me. Go find another coach. Or you need a coach to challenge you more. I'm not the most challenging coach, or I'm not the most empathetic coach, or I'm not the most creative coach, or I'm not the coach to best work with this type of challenge. And sometimes it's admitting within the session that, you know what, I need a moment because I'm projecting. Your challenge is so close to heart that I realize I'm connecting to the topic and I need a moment to disconnect. Or admitting to the client that, you know what, I went to the visitor mindset for a while or the vacationer mindset for a while. Give me a minute, I need to focus again. Or asking the client to repeat something because we missed it. Those moments of vulnerability, most of us miss because we're connected to how will I appear? What will the client think? I want to be professional. I want to do the best thing for the client. And so I myself cannot, as much as I let down my shields, I need to focus on my image and how I look to the client. So building a psychologically safe space of trust implies that, and I'm not saying that you jump into the first session and fully get vulnerable with the client. But as you build encounters over encounters, and as you build your own trust in your power as a coach, then yes, you become okay, even from the first session, to trusting your intuition and stopping and saying, I know I'm not going to be able to help you. My intuition tells me I'm not the best person for you, and I'm trusting it, and I'm allowing you to decide. Or I'm so stuck, I'm so connected to the challenge that you have. So the more masterful you become, the more humble you become, in a sense, to your own vulnerability, your own weaknesses, your own fears, your own points of power and points of strength versus points of weaknesses, and so on. And that's when you can really create a space when the client can be themselves fully. And that's a very powerful session for any client, regardless of what goal they want to reach. Because there are very few instances in life, regardless of what system the client is in, whether it's home or work or with their family or with friends, or even with if they're playing a sport or a hobby, where they can be fully themselves without masks or shields, because we have personas to maintain. And it's a chance for you as a masterful coach to allow that if the client needs it, only if the client needs it. And last but not least is the practice of empathy. And most of us have studied emotional intelligence. A lot of us have looked at the word empathy comes up a lot. But for me, the definition that really connects me to empathy, it's the power and the ability to truly seeing with the eyes of someone else, listening with the ears of someone else, and feeling with the heart of someone else. And that's a very humble place where you realize, even if I know the person inside out, but in this particular moment, this person is going through something I don't know. Or even if I know everything I know, I'm able to let everything go and in the moment be a pure mirror to the other. And empathy sometimes requires me to hold the space for the client. Empathy sometimes requires me to push the client compassionately. Empathy sometimes requires me to just hold the space and be quiet, or to acknowledge the client. But the ability to see with the eyes of someone else, listen with the ears of someone else, and feel with the heart of someone else requires a very big level of completely letting go of ourselves and fully being 100% with the client in that moment. And empathy comes in moments. I mean, no matter how empathetic we are in general, but these pure moments of empathy in a coaching session, if I'm able to bring one or two of those moments, they're the moments when I really, really feel for, see through the client with what, and that's where your intuition also kicks in. Every one of these 6 requires practice, patience, perseverance, humbleness, and probably a lot of unlearning more than learning. And I'm sure most of you are aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect for me kind of gives a nice metaphor for how we reach masterful coaching. So when we start our coaching journey, in fact, very similar to when we start our life journey, to anything that we learn, at the beginning, it's about acquiring the skills. And we get to a point where we feel like, yes, now I have it. Now I've done it. Now I know it. Now I see it. And it's when you're unconscious to what you don't know. Because you're at a peak, and at that peak, you believe you're on top of the world. You've reached your ultimate. And then something happens to make you realize, I mean, the next session you have is a really bad session. Or a client comes to challenge everything you believe to be true about your power as a coach. When that happens, what happens is we kind of go down what we call Mount Despair. So I believe I know everything. And then I get to a point when I know nothing, or is coaching even powerful as a tool? Or am I even a good coach? Or am I really helping clients? And this is when a lot of coaches that I mentor come to me and say, I don't feel comfortable taking money from clients because I'm suddenly not sure, like, is this a job that should actually be paid? Am I really doing something that requires money? And how much money should I get for the kind of impact that I'm doing? That's when we're connected to that valley of despair. And every single one of us goes through those phases somehow until we reach a space where we realize trusting the process requires me to trust that it's not about me. It's the wisdom to let go of everything that I believe to be true about the skills. So I have the skills, they're embedded in me. The real tool is me. And I have all these steps that I have and these powerful questions and the listening and the presence and depending on the type of coaching model that you follow, the steps and the structure of the coaching model. But then I'm coming to the session with my full self that knows that because I'm dealing with human beings, it necessarily brings limitless possibilities. Because when we're dealing with human beings, we know that every single encounter requires an explorer type of presence, where we realize that even if the same client has been through the same challenge 10 times, it doesn't mean it's the same challenge for the client, because every time the client went through the challenge, it was probably met by a different version of the client. Or maybe I've heard this challenge from the same client 10 times, but today, maybe I'll have a resourcefulness that I never had in any one of my previous sessions. And that's when you reach the level of true mastery, where you let go of the process, let go of the tools, let go of trying to impress, let go of trying to prove to anybody, including yourself, that you're good at being a coach. And in a way, it's counterintuitive, because regardless of where coaching meets us in our life, by the time we reach it, we're probably experts in something. And there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be had about the power of the expert mindset. Because an explorer mindset needs to unlearn, needs to remain curious and humble to life, to humans, to changes, and to situations. And last but not least, before I do a quick closure and then we open the room for questions, Carl Jung has a quote that I really relate to. And his quote is, we meet ourselves time and again on the path of life. And the reason I really love that quote is because in a way, one of the ways we reach the most masterful version of ourselves is to connect to every version of us, including our shadows, including the parts in us that we don't acknowledge, the parts in us that we don't like, the parts in us that we're afraid of, the parts in us that trigger us, the parts in us that are weak, the parts in us that are too powerful, the parts in us that sometimes are critical about what's going on. So once you develop your own mastery of yourself, that's when you can bring that in a way to the space. And the way you develop mastery of yourself is to realize that even if you've met yourself 1,000,000 times over the number of years that you've lived and the different encounters that you've had, every single time you're meeting a new version of you. Because every encounter you have, maybe not on a linear level, but on a non-linear level, has given you perspective, insight, learning, and has opened up things in you that you maybe never knew you had before. So opening yourself up to that is really what brings masterful coaching. And I'll close with a quote by T.S. Eliot. And the reason this quote kind of resonates with me a lot is throughout my own study, part of what I had to study was anthropology, and our anthropology professor always used to like to give us quotes from T.S. Eliot, and this is one of his favorite quotes. We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring and searching will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And that was one of the quotes that constantly triggered me, because for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what T.S. Eliot wanted to say. And every time I'd ask, the answer that came from my professor was, when you're ready, the quote will land on you. When you're ready, the quote will land on you. And one time the professor said to me, you know what? When the student is ready, the master will appear. And when the student is really ready, the master will disappear, or the teacher will disappear. And those answers were very frustrating for me. If you remember, I'm originally an engineer, and engineers like structure, like process, like things tangible. So to me, that answer was way too wishy-washy. Until I went through my own journey of trying to become the best version of myself as a coach, and I realized that yes, we keep exploring to find how we can become better coaches. And we keep going round and round and round until we realize it all goes back to off at the beginning of our journey, wanting to be better human beings, wanting to be in service, wanting to bring meaning to life, and wanting to live a life worth living. So that for me summarizes the essence of what it means to have masterful coaching. I will stop my presentation there. And I promise to allow much more room than that for coaching, for questions. So let's give the floor to questions. Jan?
Yes, so Rania, we have a question from Manish. How to distinguish between a genuine explorer and a repeat visitor?
It's a very interesting question, Manish. And the answer that comes to me is, you yourself will know. I mean, this is not a question for me to answer about someone else. It's for me to ask myself and kind of challenge my own thinking. Am I really exploring, or am I trying to prove to myself that I've done it all, I've seen it all, I've been there before? And a lot of times, I mean, the question or the quote that always comes to me is the Albert Einstein famous quote of, sometimes we go through the same journey the same way every time, expecting different results. And that's in a way a repeat visitor. It's like I'm telling myself, I'm opening myself up to exploration, but I'm already fixed with my know-it-all mindset going into the exploration. And the only way to become a true explorer is to let go of everything I know to be true and break the pattern of exploring in the same way. So the answer is, you will know if you're very open and truthful with yourself, and your intuition knows, but you need to connect to it. Am I really opening myself up, or am I convincing myself that I am, but I'm totally sidestepping the vulnerable arena of exploration? And we do it not just in coaching, we do it sometimes in new relationships, we do it sometimes in new challenges. It's like, I'm going to open myself up to the challenge, but I'm actually going into the challenge, and for whatever reason, the metaphor that came to my mind right now, if anyone of you has tried skating, I lived in the Emirates for a very long time, and there was nothing to do except go ice skating. And I remember to learn to ice skate at the beginning, the best way to do it was to put on your skates, and if you ever, the skates have really, really thin blades, so you don't have balance on the ice rink. The only way to learn, and I know because I took many lessons for many hours, but what I would do every time, go into the ice rink and pretend to learn to skate. But I always made sure that I was like 10 centimeters away from the side, so that if I was ever going to fall, or if I was ever going to get hurt or bump into someone, I could immediately hold on to the side so I wouldn't. And it took me hours and hours and hours until my brother came and said, you know what, I'm going to teach you ice skating. And he took me and took me straight to the middle of the ice rink, and he let me go. And I started screaming. And he said, you're not going to learn except this way. And when he let me go, I fell. I scraped my knee. I hurt my arm. I hit my head. I felt really self-conscious about the way I looked. It was really cold. And I picked myself up. And in 2 hours, I was never an expert ice skater, but I was able to ice skate. So the metaphor connects with me because that's really where we explore. It's allowing ourselves to be in a space where we're going to get hurt, we're going to fall down, we're going to look bad, we're going to get messy, we're going to say things that don't land with the client, and it doesn't matter, because that's where all the fun, the magic, the learning, and the true transformation happens. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, Manish is saying thanks for the explanation, Rania. Okay, so next question, Sophia. Can I use my empathy when I'm coaching to be generous, transparency about what the process is and how both are feeling about the ongoing conversation when my client is in an emotional state?
If I understand your question correctly, Sophia, what I understand from that question is, if I feel that I need to bring some transparency to the client about their victimizing, or they're feeling sorry for themselves, or you know what, this is a pattern you keep repeating and I want to say it, how can I say it? Is that the question? Okay, yes, definitely. And what I always say is, if I really want to be kind to the client, and I always used to connect to, as a kind, one of my biggest strengths, one of my biggest character strengths that I relate to is kindness. And so as a kind person, I'm not going to say hard facts. I'm going to avoid things which might seemingly hurt the client or make them feel like, but you're not being there for me, you're not being kind. And my biggest lesson was, you know what? Clear is kind and unclear is unkind. So if you want to be kind to the client, and if you want to be empathetic with the client, and sometimes empathy means telling the client not what they want to hear, but what they need to hear. And bringing to the surface things that nobody else will tell the client, either because they're going to avoid doing it, and it's up to you out of empathy and vulnerability and in the best interest of the client, and from a place of generosity, saying it to them, telling them what they won't hear outside, and because you're not emotionally vested. I mean, the biggest advantage you have as a coach is, supposedly, I'm not involved in the dance. So I can easily, from a perspective place, give empathy. Which is why it's hard sometimes to be empathetic when you're coaching someone who you're in the dance with, whether I'm coaching an employee who's under me, or I'm coaching a family member or a friend I know well, because you're with them in the dance and in the balcony at the same time. So my answer is yes, because that's what the client sometimes needs the most, is a very compassionate, and excuse the word, slap in the face. It's like, wake up, you're victimizing, or stop telling yourself the story. And sometimes we need to bring in a little bit of challenge, but a compassionate, challenging energy.
Yeah, thank you very much for clearing.
Thank you, Sophia.
The next question, Fatma, depending on our intuition without judgment, how challenging is that?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Fatma. How challenging is it to trust our intuition without judging it? Fatma, if you're here, can you kind of elaborate a little bit on the question?
I don't really know if Fatma is in here.
Okay, she just wrote yes, exactly. Well,
yeah, okay.
What I would say, Fatma, is once my intuition comes and I start judging it, questioning it, or subduing it, that's already against bringing the competency of intuition. When I feel an intuition, the best thing to do is to blurt the intuition and then to let it go. And that helps you not judge it. And whenever I feel like bringing an intuition that I'm really not sure how it's going to land with the client, either because of the type of client, or because of what the intuition is, or because where it's coming in the session, I ask for permission. Do I have permission to share an intuition knowing that I have no idea where it's coming from? Or knowing that it might sound strange? And if the client says yes, and it does sound strange, it makes it so much easier for me not to judge it, because then I can say, when the client says, what are you saying? I have no idea where that's coming from. I say, yeah, makes sense. I also felt it was strange. And it's easy for me to let go. So instead of trying to put context to intuition, which is counterintuitive to what intuition brings, just allow it to come, allow it to process, and allow it to flow through you and out, and then let it go. It's not about you. Your intuition, supposedly, if it's true intuition, is coming from the space, from the client, from the energy, from something that you're sensing deep down in your gut. So allow it to come in, process, come out through you to the client, and then let it go wherever it needs to go, including nowhere. Does that answer your question? Hopefully.
Okay, so next, Lynn is saying, thank you, Rania, for such an informative presentation. And we have maybe some time for another question. So it's, how can we prevent arrogance or ego to pop in when trusting our intuition?
How can we prevent arrogance or ego to pop in when trusting our intuition?
Yeah.
I assume the question is coming from a place of someone who's really connected to their intuition, and it's landed so well many times that you start feeling like, I'm powerful. My intuitions are all good. So if I tell you an intuition and it doesn't land on you, I'm going to challenge you and say yes. Or sometimes I'll bring it back in several different ways because I know my intuition. You just haven't connected with it yet. Is that what the question is kind of landing now? I'm not sure what that is. Okay. I guess my answer to that would be going back to the agility between trusting my intuition, but never getting attached to it. And I have a famous, I always say it in almost all of my programs because it's so true. There's a very delicate dance in our agility between getting fully engaged with something, whatever that something is, but never getting attached to it. And it's an internal balance. So digging deeper and trusting my intuition, but never getting attached to the power of my intuition. And that requires me to humble myself always by knowing that even if it's happened many, many times before, who am I to know? And I agree that if, and this, by the way, applies not just to intuition, but anything that serves us, any power or strength that we have, there is an ego trap. And that's why most of us as coaches have learned to help clients manage an ego trap. The ego trap of being too kind or being too assertive or being too opinionated. And the best way to manage our ego trap as we help our clients is to learn from others. So kind of get fully engaged with whatever you have to bring.
I have really enjoyed this session. Good inside information, many doubts about my coaching practice.
Sorry, can
Sophia, you unmute. You were speaking. So
I
was that a question or?
I think she wrote it in the she was probably now I know what you do. You're dictating to her. Smart. I really enjoyed the session. Thank you, Sophia. That's kind of you to say.
Speak? Can I speak?
Yes, of course. I guess, yeah, you can.
Can I speak?
Yes, so go ahead, Sophia.
Most of the time I've watched. Yes, most of the time I've watched the Tuesday sessions, and I've enjoyed a lot of sessions. But Miss Rania, thank you very much. Many of the information you have given is really related to the coaching practice that we are going through. I'm talking generally, but for myself, you have answered a lot of insights that I think that I've really benefited for today's session. Thank you very much. May God bless you, and we would love to have you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you for saying that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you all for being here. Rania, especially thank you for bringing this information and this presentation and being such a great speaker. And what we are looking forward for the next Transformational Tuesday, it will be Marco Bushman and the connection quotient. So take a seat and look forward to the next session.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today.
Bye.
Okay, so bye.
Do you coach? Do you take sessions for coaching courses like this?